it sounded like he said that's why I and so many like me have cancer.
Yes.
And now I know the White House is trying to say that he meant that he had like non-basal cell carcinoma or something,
skin cancer
of some
basically,
which is very
when
common
he worked
for
as a lifeguard.
Yeah.
Also, like from being out in the sun, effectively.
I know tons of people who have had that. That's, usually unless you have melanoma and it's really serious, people don't think of that as, but removing a precancerous growth is usually not something you refer to as, oh, I had cancer, right? I mean, the people in this audience who have had cancer have an understanding of how serious that is. But even before that, I used to have to use my windshield wipers to get the oil slick from the air off of my windshield. Why does Joe Biden think he's allowed to pretend that he grew up as like a chimney sweep or that he was a coal miner or something? Like, he was not these things.
He hadn't done anything for a couple of days after coming back from the Middle East. They shot him all up with whatever drugs give him more energy, and they trotted him out. Where was he? Where was he giving a speech? Somewhere in Massachusetts.
At an old coal plant, and he gave the speech in front of what was looking like the surface of the moon, because that's what's going to happen, folks. Unless we pass AOC's Green New Deal, the whole world will look like the nuclear apocalypse has already hit. That's why climate change is so important.
So he has COVID, but he is in the grips of such dementia-addled absurdity virtually every time that he speaks now. You really don't know what he's going to say. And I'm assuming he went off teleprompter again for this. And he ended up talking about how he got cancer because when he was a kid, there was oil on the front windshields. And just listen to this. The White House had to backtrack and try to explain away the gaffes. I mean, it's a tough job right now. Every time Biden speaks, they have to come up afterwards and clean up everything that he said. Here's Biden kind of rambling about how he got cancer because when he was a kid, there was oil on the windshield.
Not very much unlike where I grew up in a place called Claymont, Delaware, which has more oil refineries than Houston, Texas had in its region, just across the line in Pennsylvania. And all the prevailing winds were our way. I just lived up the road. In an apartment complex when we moved to Delaware. And just up the road to a little school I went to, Holy Rosary Grade School. And because it was a 4-lane highway that was accessible, my mother drove us, and rather than us be able to walk. And guess what? The first frost, you know what was happening? You had to put on their windshield wipers to get literally the oil slick off the window. That's why I and so damn many other people I grew up have cancer. And why can't, for the longest time, Delaware had the highest cancer rate in the nation.
There's so much there.
Yes.
One thing is, before we even get to that's why it sounded like he said that's why I and so many like me have cancer.
Yes.
And now I know the White House is trying to say that he meant that he had like non-basal cell carcinoma or something,
skin cancer
of some
kind,
which is very
when
common
he worked
for
as a lifeguard. Also, like from being out in the sun, effectively.
I know tons of people who have had that. That's usually unless you have melanoma and it's really serious, people don't think of that as but removing a precancerous growth is usually not something you refer to as, oh, I had cancer, right? I mean, the people in this audience who have had cancer have an understanding of how serious that is. But even before that, I used to have to use my windshield wipers to get the oil slick from the air off of my windshield. Why does Joe Biden think he's allowed to pretend that he grew up as like a chimney sweep or that he was a coal miner or something? Like, he was not these things.
And he also said, I have cancer, which would mean that he has it right now, which would have been major news, unlike COVID, which he has. And they had to come back and try to clean all this up, but none of it makes sense. And it isn't really connected because, again, the skin cancer that he had, I think, is based on when he was hanging out with Corn Pop back in the day as a lifeguard at local pools. And so it's all so strange every time he talks. And I look at it and I wonder, Buck, we're almost to the point now where when Joe Biden comes out and speaks, you have no idea what he's going to say. But also, as the listener or the viewer, it's like watching a kid who's trying to learn how to walk, trying to figure out if he's going to be able to make it. This is what we used to do when I was when you have young kids. Like, you sit on one side of the room and your wife is on the other side of the room, and you're like, hey, let's see if you can walk from one of us to the other. Biden, every time he speaks, is like that kid who's just learning how to walk, and you don't know if he's going to make it or he's just going to fall halfway through. I mean, it's really an uncomfortable situation for the leader of the free world to have put all of us, and for the Democrats to have put all of us in this situation, and to still have 30 some odd months left, theoretically, of his tenure.
Yeah, he's not the president of the local Rotary Club.
Yeah.
He's the president of the United States.
And that would be tough. Even if you were the president of the Rotary Club, you'd be nervous when the old guy got up and talked because you knew something might go awry. But it's not that important of a job in the grand scheme of things. This is kind of a big deal.
The people who spent 4 years lecturing all of us about how Donald Trump was a danger to democracy.
Yes.
And a totally unfit. That was the word that it was, unfit. And it's worth noting that every person that any of you listening to this ever saw on TV, or they don't really do radio, but on TV or, in print at the New York Times or at CNN or whatever, who referred to Trump as unfit, offered up and supported with everything they had this clown who is medically unfit. I mean, who is unfit by virtue of age and physical deterioration, on top of the fact that the Biden crime family is also really corrupt, and we'll talk more about that later. But this is their response. This is their version of what is a responsible choice for our democracy. Democrats that I know and private Clay, they wouldn't even try to defend him anymore. They're just like, this is bad. We made a mistake. But they'll still vote for him. They'll vote for him against any other Republican if he's the nominee. They don't care, but they think they're the responsible guardians of our democracy. Sure.
All the people who spent years lecturing us that we were going to be on the wrong side of history went out and voted for the worst president of most of our lives. They have put themselves on the wrong side of history by lecturing all of us about how we were going to end up on the wrong side of history for supporting Donald Trump. I would love if we could have some mean tweets right now. I would sign up for some mean tweets in a heartbeat compared to Joe Biden destroying everything that he touches.
And the people who also claim to be so concerned with everyone's health that they had to put through these unprecedented and now we know unjustifiable mandates and all these COVID policies and all the lockdowns. Right now, they'll also tell you that somehow Joe Biden is healthy enough and of sound mind enough that he should still be making decisions of all kinds, but specifically, we're going to go into a period here in the winter season where you're going to have more executive orders on COVID. You're going to have more people that have to listen to whatever this. Maybe there'll be some lawsuits over it, but they're not done. They're not done with everybody, and Joe Biden's making the calls on this. It's appalling, honestly. I mean, people, they are just, the libs are incapable of shame, Clay. I don't know what else to say because this whole situation is shameful.
I know the overturning of Roe v. Wade has gotten a lot of attention, but think about how consequential the Supreme Court decision to not allow Joe Biden's vaccine mandate was, because tens of millions of people were able to avoid having to get the COVID shot. I know way too many had to, but it doesn't work at all. It is totally useless, and yet we're still requiring people to get that shot in order to be employed.
I mean, this was tyranny. Just so everyone can be very clear, we use that word, what Biden was doing by mandating that every business with over 100 employees, they're trying to legally massage it. But basically every large business in the country, and then every small business was going to follow, had to get these shots or else they were going to pay crazy fines and everyone was going to get fired. It was tyrannical, and they were wrong. It's bad enough to be tyrannical, and maybe it's a judgment call because there was some upside to it, right?
Bad combo.
Right. This was
Tyranny
tyrannical
plus being wrong.
And useless.
Yeah.
And that's actually a great description of Joe Biden. Tyrannical, wrong, and useless. There we go. Well done, everybody.
You always ask yourself as a press secretary, do we have a messaging problem or a facts problem? Well, now you've got both. You have a president who's running the country into the ground further and further, deeper and deeper. And you have a press secretary, I'm sorry to say it, who just isn't up for the job. I mean, she called Justice Clarence Thomas Judge Thompson. Not only that, she's always saying, I don't have anything for you on something like the baby formula crisis. There are things when I went to the podium I knew I needed an update on. COVID-19, for example, baby formula would be another in this case. And she flipped through her binder for like 45 seconds and didn't have an answer and said, I have nothing for you. So they've got both. I mean, you got a messaging problem, you got a facts problem. Nothing is redeeming about this administration. I believe John Kirby is going to take that lectern at some point because it's getting pretty bad.
That was former White House press secretary Kayleigh McEnany, friend of the show. Kayleigh and I got into media around the same time. We actually did. I remember she was on my panel show at The Blaze back when Glenn started The Blaze in 2012 or 2011. Kayleigh was, obviously then rose up, became a superstar, White House press secretary. But she's raising an interesting point here, which is not only do you have a Biden administration that at the very top, the president himself is clearly, it is blanket over the knees, sippy cup, feed the ducks time for this guy. And that's fun. We're all hopefully going to be so lucky to live to that point in our lives. But it really is time for him to spend time with the grandkids or the great-grandkids or, help Hunter a little bit more. There's some stuff that he could be doing other than running the country right now. And you look around him, though, and we always say, who would you draft or who? There don't even seem to be pockets of real competency, Clay, in the decision-making process and in the or of the decision makers around him and of the public-facing individuals. Pete Buttigieg should basically be on the RNC payroll at this point because he keeps saying, I don't understand what the problem is. Why doesn't everyone just buy an electric car? It's like, listen, McKinsey guy, you need to calm down with the everybody needs to buy what at Blue Book value is now starts out at about a $60,000 car as the answer to their gas woes. Who is gaining ground for them right now with the public, Clay? Which Democrat that is tied to this White House, put aside whether we even think they're competent, who is doing a good job in the public messaging?
I think that the Biden White House is so incompetent that it's going to destroy anyone's ability. Because I do believe that Joe Biden's not going to run. And I think the overall specter, the aura of incompetence surrounding the Biden White House is going to lead to Democrats ending up with a clean break. So I think it's going to torpedo Kamala. I think it's going to torpedo Mayor Pete. Anybody else who is in this administration right now. And that's why I ultimately think Democrats are going to end up nominating Gavin Newsom. Now, Dick Morris, remember Dick Morris? He wrote recently.
Everybody remembers Dick Morris.
Yeah, Dick Morris, the triangulating genius.
There's a lot of stuff with Dick Morris. We remember Dick Morris.
Of the Bill Clinton administration says that he believes what's going to end up happening, that Hillary is prepping herself, and that he believes there's going to be so many left-wing rubes that are going to rush in to try and fill the Joe Biden void, that Hillary is going to be the savior of Democrats and be nominated in 2024.
Well, if Hillary emerges even a little bit, Donald Trump knows he can beat Hillary. That's done. And I'm not saying he couldn't even beat Biden, but I think there's no way he wouldn't want to get involved in that matchup. So that makes for some interesting possibilities here. But Clay, still there's a little bit of a disconnect that I see with some. Look, the individual candidates all matter, but right now, Fetterman versus Oz in Pennsylvania, critical Senate race.
Yeah,
Fetterman's ahead, even though the guy's like,
right,
fracking is a stain on our state, which is just an ignorant, stupid thing to say that the leftists all love to hear. But Fetterman's ahead. Warnock is ahead of Herschel Walker right now. We're really pushing for Herschel here, but Warnock's ahead in all the polls I've seen. Laxalt's looking pretty good in Nevada. And I haven't really seen that many head-to-head polls because we still have to have that Republican primary where right now we have 3 Republican contenders for that Senate seat in Arizona. But I'm just saying there's still a lot of work to be done. People are willing to come out, and even some independents, obviously. I mean, you're going to see, white working class voters and Latino voters and some African-American voters who maybe were on the fence who are still going to vote based on the candidate in some of these Senate races. It is not inconceivable that look, the House is looking good. That's why we're throwing a party, right? We're going to be having fun because at least the House will be out of Democrat hands. Senate's going to be a close-fought contest, everybody, even with this incredibly incompetent Democrat White House.
You're right. And the challenge for Republicans is going to be to nationalize the overall decision-making of 2022 such that there are coattails so you're able to pull some of these guys across the finish lines in what is likely to be very competitive races. Dr. Oz, as you mentioned, in Pennsylvania, that was a bruising Republican primary. So far, everybody has not gotten a line behind him. Fetterman is running effectively a Joe Biden 2020 campaign where he's got health-related concerns and has not been out on the trail hardly at all. And then you have Herschel Walker against Warnock. I tend to think Herschel is getting his message refined, and football season, I think, is going to help him with a lot of Georgia Bulldog fans. And I believe Brian Kemp is going to beat Stacey Abrams pretty soundly. So
the people of Santa Monica are going to be very upset about that.
Yeah,
Clay.
people in Santa Monica and in New York City, where all of the money is being raised for Stacey Abrams' governor's campaign. And then we got, look, like you said, Nevada, Arizona. There are a lot of places out there where it's going to be a fine line. Where, look, we're number one in Phoenix. We're number one in a lot of demos in Las Vegas. A lot of you listening out there in many of these states, in Georgia, all over Pennsylvania, we're talking about 1,000 votes potentially deciding who wins Senate votes, Senate races. I mean, it's going to be tight.
You're going to see some critical Senate races. So this is why, on the one hand, we're sitting here saying, what's obvious and what is true, and even Democrats are admitting now, which is that this White House is a mess. But that doesn't mean that things are just going to all lock into place here. Fetterman is a surprisingly tough candidate so far in Pennsylvania. You got a sitting senator with Raphael Warnock in Georgia. He's got a lot of support nationally. He's got a lot of support even in the state of Georgia, obviously. So we got to stay focused, everybody. We got to look at what the issues are in these individual states, who these candidates are. And you're going to have Senate races that come down to 10,000 votes. And to your point, Clay, one of those races is going to just be a razor's edge margin.